Look at your forearm. A chimpanzee has hair, a gorilla has hair, an orangutan has hair. You have skin. Fine little hairs cover your body, but from any useful distance you are almost naked. Put a human beside any other primate, and the difference is so stark it almost feels wrong, as if one of them has been stripped. That one is us. For almost every mammal on Earth, fur is standard equipment. It traps heat, protects skin, sheds rain, blocks sunlight, and keeps an animal from scraping itself raw. Lose that coat and you inherit immediate, catastrophic problems. Evolution does not make a change that drastic lightly. Yet our lineage did exactly that. Somewhere in deep time, one branch of apes gave up the protective mammalian uniform and stepped into a punishing world completely exposed. This shift did not just change how we looked. It fundamentally altered how we moved, where we could travel, when we could hunt, and how much we eventually depended on technology to survive. Human nakedness is not a cosmetic accident. It is one of the central engineering events in the making of our species. To understand why this happened, we have to travel back into the world our ancestors entered. Between about 7 and 5 million years ago, the landscape of Africa was undergoing a profound transition. Forests were no longer an endless, stable backdrop for ape evolution. The climate shifted. Ancient woodlands began to break apart, and open habitats began to spread across the continent. While the ancestors of modern chimpanzees remained tightly tied to the safety of forest life, our ancestors ventured deeper into a harsher mosaic of trees, scrub, and open ground. In this new environment, shade was highly unreliable, travel distances grew significantly longer, and the sun transformed into a daily, punishing physical force. This wide-open ecosystem penalized one biological vulnerability above all else: overheating. Historians and anthropologists note that humans are profoundly unusual primates because we are anatomically built for endurance. We possess the unique capability to keep moving in intense heat that forces other mammals to instantly slow down or retreat into hiding. We can walk for hours without stopping. We can run for long, continuous stretches. We can remain remarkably active during the absolute hottest part of the day. But this survival capability did not come from raw bravery. It came down to pure thermodynamics. Fur is an excellent, highly efficient form of insulation. But that insulation becomes a lethal trap when your muscles are producing constant internal heat under a blazing sun. The more active a furry animal becomes, the more dangerous its own coat gets. While a chimpanzee can explode into a brief burst of motion, a human can simply keep going. The key mechanical innovation that unlocked this ability was our specialized cooling system. Humans are covered in eccrine sweat glands by the millions, while most mammals possess apocrine glands, which secrete a thick, oily fluid primarily used for chemical signaling. Our species specialized in something else. Eccrine glands pump water, pure, thin water onto the surface of the naked skin. As that water encounters the moving air of the savanna, it evaporates, absorbing thermal energy and pulling heat directly away from the body. It is an astonishingly effective cooling system, a biological radiator. But this system operates under a strict physical constraint. It only works well if air can move completely freely over the skin. Thick mammalian fur traps moisture. It creates a stagnant boundary layer of humid air, slowing evaporation down to a crawl. In intense heat, a wet coat transforms a cooling system into a suffocating wet blanket. If you want a primate that can travel long distances and remain active in punishing heat, the fur simply has to go. Yet, hairlessness alone was only half the equation. It required a structural rearrangement of our posture. As our ancestors became committed bipeds, standing upright on 2 legs, they drastically reduced the amount of direct midday sun hitting the body compared with a 4-legged animal. Stand upright, and the shoulders and head take the brunt of the radiation, while the torso presents a much smaller surface area to the sky. The body also sits higher above the scorching ground, where airflow is significantly better. Bipedalism and sweating work together in tandem. Hairlessness completes the system. Once that system was securely in place, it unlocked a revolutionary way of living. Anthropologists call it persistence hunting. A human does not need to outrun an antelope in one explosive burst. Instead, a human can force that animal into a relentless race of body temperatures. In midday heat, many quadrupeds face a lethal anatomical limitation. To cool themselves, they have to stop and pant. But panting and galloping interfere with each other mechanically. They can run or they can cool efficiently, But doing both at once is difficult, if not impossible. Humans, however, can run and sweat at the exact same time. Step after step, mile after mile, the hunter tracks the target. The prey overheats, slows down, and finally collapses from thermal exhaustion. What defeats the animal is not raw speed. It is the sun, leveraged by a hairless ape like a weapon. This is why human skin is not bare by accident. We did not become completely smooth like dolphins or elephants. Instead, we kept a highly reduced coat of tiny body hairs. These microhairs are just enough to help sweat spread evenly across the skin and evaporate with maximum efficiency. Human skin is not unfinished fur. It is a highly specialized cooling surface. There is another clue sitting right on top of your head. We lost most of our body hair, yet we kept a dense patch of it exactly where the sun hits hardest. This seems completely backward until you remember what happens to a primate skull under an equatorial sky. A naked body can cool itself efficiently through sweat, but a naked skull with an overheating brain is an absolute biological disaster. Scalp hair acts like a shade roof. It reduces solar heat gain from above while still allowing the rest of the body to dump heat through sweat. The same basic logic explains why hair remains in places like the armpits and the groin. There, it reduces friction and manages skin-on-skin contact where our bodies move the most. This was not a random, patchy accident of evolution. It was a total anatomical redesign. But overheating was not the only liability our ancestors inherited when they gave up the mammalian uniform. Strip away fur under equatorial sunlight, and the body takes a direct, unshielded hit from ultraviolet radiation. For millions of years, fur had been our primary shield. Once that shield was reduced, human skin had to fundamentally change to survive. Evolution answered this sudden crisis with pigment. Dark skin evolved as an immediate line of defense. Melanin absorbs ultraviolet radiation and protects deeper tissues from mutation. That is why the earliest hairless humans in Africa were entirely dark-skinned. Later, as some populations drifted away from the equator and moved into northern regions with much weaker IV light, skin tones lightened. It was a delicate biological balancing act to manage protection with vitamin D production. The entire geography of human skin color begins with a body that lost its fur. So, the evolutionary chain is remarkably clear. Open country favored efficient cooling favored sweating, sweating favored reduced fur, and reduced fur favored dark skin. And the story did not end with temperature. Giving up fur also altered our relationship with the microscopic monsters of the ancient world. Parasites thrive in thick fur. Ticks do. Fleas do. Lice and mites do. A dense coat of hair gives these creatures shelter, a secure breeding space, and cover from being removed. Strip away most of that habitat, and life gets dramatically harder for the creatures that bite you, drain your blood, weaken your young, and spread fatal disease. Less fur meant fewer places for your microscopic enemies to hide. Hairlessness also fundamentally transformed our social lives. Other primates spend endless hours grooming one another with deep patience, using their hands to inspect fur for pests. In the primate world, grooming is not merely a matter of personal hygiene. It is the social glue that builds trust, forms alliances, communicates affection, and maintains peacekeeping within a group. When humans stripped away the vast physical surface that made traditional grooming possible, we lost our primary tool for social bonding. One highly influential anthropological idea is that speech and other forms of vocal bonding eventually stepped in to take over that critical social work. Our voices became the new tool to keep larger human groups connected. But dropping the mammalian uniform came with a massive bill that had to be paid every single night after sunset. Hairless bodies lose heat with terrifying speed when the sun drops beneath the horizon, when unexpected rain arrives, or when the wind rises across the open plains. A naked ape in cold weather is an incredibly vulnerable ape. This immediate physical vulnerability did not destroy us. Instead, it aggressively shaped the very next chapter of human history, because fur had to be replaced somehow. Humans did not replace their coats biologically. We replaced them culturally. First came the mastery of fire. Fire gave a completely hairless primate warmth after dark, emergency protection during sudden cold snaps, and access to environments that bare skin alone could never tolerate. Once fire was under our control, it opened the doorway to further technology. Then came the construction of shelters, followed by comfortable bedding, wrapped animal hides, sewn clothing, and eventually woven fibers. While other mammals are forced to wear their climate control from birth, humans learned to manufacture it. That simple necessity changed absolutely everything. Once you survive by externalizing your protection into technology, biological evolution no longer has to solve every single problem with anatomy. Growing a heavier winter coat becomes entirely unnecessary if your group knows how to make heavy cloaks, build efficient windbreaks, and keep a communal fire alive through the night. A single ecological zone is no longer a permanent prison if custom clothing and engineered shelter allow you to migrate wherever you please. A hairless body, paired with an adaptive culture, rapidly became one of the most flexible designs on the face of the earth. This is exceptionally easy to miss today because we are so completely used to it. Humans are not simply less hairy than chimpanzees. Humans are absolute experts at living outside their natural biological envelope. A chimpanzee stripped of its coat faces an immediate, fatal crisis. But a human without clothing simply invents it. A human without a warm shelter builds one from scratch. A human who lacks a protective layer of fur can skin another mammal and wear its uniform as their own. We did not defeat our biological limitations by growing a better natural coat. We defeated them by inventing creative substitutes, and those substitutes ultimately opened up the entire planet for our colonization. Human groups successfully expanded into freezing deserts, high mountains, temperate forests, and eventually the brutal landscape of Ice Age Eurasia, all while carrying custom, portable microclimates right on their backs. In a very real sense, losing our fur helped turn intelligence from a mere advantage into an absolute requirement for survival. When natural selection stripped us of our physical armor, it forced our minds to expand. We could no longer rely on the biology we were born with. We had to rely on the culture we could build. Over the years, a few alternative theories have been proposed to explain our nakedness, including the popular semi-aquatic ape hypothesis, which suggests we lost our hair to swim more efficiently. But these theories generally fail because our own bodies already provide the definitive answer. Human hair loss perfectly matches the anatomy of a terrestrial primate, specifically shaped by intense heat, constant movement, heavy sweat, and wide-open country life. While secondary forces, ranging from parasite defense to sexual selection, likely added evolutionary pressure in the same direction, heat management was the primary driver of this massive anatomical shift. The architecture of the human body tells this story with complete clarity. We possess an extraordinary, unmatched capacity for sweating. We have drastically reduced body fur. We carry dark skin as our original, protective default condition. We walk with an upright posture that dramatically lowers our solar exposure and optimizes cooling. And we possess endurance abilities that are completely unmatched by any other primate on Earth. Every single piece of our anatomy fits the exact same engineering design. Humans became the hairless ape because thick fur was actively standing in the way of us becoming human. This transition rewrote the rules of engagement between our species and the natural world. By externalizing our insulation, we broke free from the environmental traps that keep other primates locked in specific ecological niches. A gorilla cannot choose to shed its coat when migrating to a warmer valley, nor can a chimpanzee grow a thicker layer of fur when a cold front moves through the canopy. They are bound to their anatomy. We, through the profound accident of our nakedness, became bound only to our ingenuity. Yet, the old design never completely vanished from our bodies. Look closely during a sudden chill, and you will see goosebumps rippling across your bare skin. Those tiny bumps are caused by millions of micromuscles contracting beneath the surface, trying desperately to raise a coat of fur we no longer possess. In a shaggy mammal, this reflex traps a critical layer of insulating air to preserve body heat, or makes the animal appear larger and more intimidating to a nearby threat. In us, it is a completely hollow mechanical reflex, a structural ghost of an older body plan operating on modern, naked skin. The evidence of this transition is even written directly into our pre-birth development. Inside the womb, human fetuses develop a fine, downy coat of hair known as lanigo. For a brief window during gestation, every single one of us looks remarkably like our primate cousins, covered in a uniform of ancestral fur that is typically shed back into the fluid before we ever take our first breath into the outside world. It is a striking evolutionary reminder that we are not cleanly separated from our prehistoric past. We are modified apes, still carrying the physical marks of exactly what we used to be. That reality makes our nakedness even more extraordinary when you calculate the stakes. Natural selection does not strip a mammal down to its bare skin unless the survival payoff for doing so is absolutely monumental. The immediate risks of losing our fur were severe. We exposed our largest organ to physical injuries, parasitic infections, and lethal solar radiation. but the biological payoff was nothing less than the absolute optimization of our species' potential. Losing our fur let us dump heat with unprecedented efficiency. It allowed our ancestors to chase down prey through the absolute peak of noon sunlight, while the rest of the animal kingdom was forced to retreat into the shade. It drove us to protect our newly exposed skin with protective layers of dark pigment, mapping the early geography of human appearance. And ultimately, it pushed us directly toward the mastery of fire, the invention of tailored clothing, and a revolutionary way of surviving that depended far less on what the body was born with, and far more on what the creative mind could build. This complete externalization of our primary survival technology did something else entirely profound. It turned our naked skin into a vast, blank canvas. In a world where every other mammal's physical appearance is rigidly locked down by the genetic color patterns of their fur, human skin unexpectedly became an open slate for deep cultural expression. Long before we ever invented the first woven fabrics or tailored garments, archaeological evidence shows that our ancestors were already using ground clay, charcoal, ash, and natural pigments like red ochre to deliberately paint and decorate their naked bodies. We effectively transformed our exposed tissue into a highly sophisticated visual billboard for social identity, explicitly signaling status, tribal affiliation, tracking experience, and reproductive readiness to anyone else in the camp. Physical attraction and personal identity became fundamentally visual concepts played out across smooth, bare skin rather than a shaggy mammalian coat. When we lost our hair, we did not just become naked apes. We became visual storytellers, using our own living bodies as the primary medium for our art and our social rules. This unique capacity for self-expression ultimately laid the structural groundwork for everything we consider modern human culture. The exact moment our ancestors began decorating their bare skin was the moment we began completely separating our identity from the raw, functional constraints of the animal kingdom. We stopped merely surviving passively within nature, and instead began actively projecting our internal mental worlds outward onto our physical forms. It is a straight, completely unbroken evolutionary line running from the ancient Ice Age hunter, carefully mixing red ochre by firelight inside a dark cave, to the modern individual selecting a specific outfit every morning to broadcast their personality to the outside world. Our modern fashion industries, our expressive body art, and our constant, everyday obsession with visual self-presentation are the direct cultural descendants of our lost mammalian uniform. We are, in a very literal sense, the only species on Earth that consciously decides what its outer layer will look like to the rest of the world. The winter coats we buy, the insulated houses we construct, the intricate microclimates we carefully regulate inside our vehicles and high-rise buildings. These are not merely the comfortable luxuries of a civilized society. They are the continuous biological debt we pay for a high-stakes evolutionary gamble that was made millions of years ago on the arid grasslands of East Africa. By trading our protective mammalian uniform for millions of hyper-efficient sweat glands, we entered into a permanent, unwritten contract with our own future. We collectively agreed that if our physical bodies were going to remain completely exposed to a dangerous world, our creative minds would simply have to become absolutely unstoppable to compensate. This radical evolutionary strategy has succeeded with a staggering, almost terrifying level of efficiency. It successfully transformed a slow, weak, physically vulnerable primate into a dominant global force capable of rearranging entire planetary landscapes to fit its needs. Yet, this profound mismatch between our ancient biological programming and our modern environment continues to generate a strange kind of existential friction. We spend our days sitting inside perfectly climate-controlled environments, completely shielded from wind and rain by layered synthetic fabrics, yet our deeply wired nervous systems still experience stress, panic, and everyday fatigue exactly as if we are out in the blistering savanna sun, running a grueling marathon of life and death against a prehistoric target. So, if you want the absolute shortest, most definitive answer to why we look the way we do today, it requires looking completely past the clothing stores, the modern fashion trends, and the protective safety of modern civilization. It requires returning directly to the raw, unfiltered mechanics of the human body itself. Look at your forearm one final time. That bare, vulnerable skin is not a mistake of nature, nor is it a symbol of physical weakness. It is actually the primary reason your ancient ancestors kept running through the punishing noon heat when the rest of the world was forced to stop. It is the definitive physical proof of a monumental evolutionary gamble that succeeded against all odds, the indelible mark of a creature that stopped relying on what its body was born with and finally started relying on what its mind could build.